Breaking news out of the Premier League today, Tottenham Hotspur have decided to part ways with Ange Postecoglou. Now, this was a decision that I think everybody was kind of waiting for, but no one is really too surprised. Now, Ange, you've gone out like a boss. That's all I can kind of say here. For you to be the guy to break Spurs' long, arduous trophy duck in the manner that you did, no matter what else happened this season, you have etched yourself into this club's history books. You will forever be seen by Tottenham fans in a positive light more so than a negative. It could have been very, very different if you didn't win that final, of course, but you've got out like a boss, man. You had your insane quote saying, I always win things in my second season. That's a guarantee, and you ended up doing it. You can go to any job in the world now and basically have that on your CV as the manager that did what Mourinho failed to do, that did what Antonio Conte failed to do, that did what Mauricio Pochettino failed to do, that did what so many managers before him failed to do. He can claim that he did that. I can't think of a better way to go out, personally. Now, I mean, like, if they had won the league, and okay, maybe that's a better... If he had quit, maybe. But in terms of being sacked, this is as good a way to go out as possible. I mean, it's much better than the fashion that Erik ten Hag left seasons ago, where he won the FA Cup final, and then went into the new season and got sacked 3 months later when the great feeling was completely run dry. That was the time to sack him. But for Ange, he can kind of just go out in the sunset, man. Like, he can kind of go out on his shield saying, yeah, they sacked me, but I'm the guy that brought them their first trophy in over 10 years. It's crazy. But the bigger question is it the right decision or is it not? Now, I've seen arguments for both. I'm of the opinion that it is the right decision. And I say that as a guy who really likes Ange Postecoglou. Like, I'm a big fan of Ange. I like him as a person. I think he's an incredible leader. I think he's an incredible orator as well, too. Not just in terms of his cool quotes that he does, but I just think he speaks very, very well. He has a kind of presence that when he speaks, you want to listen to him. And I think he is a good manager. I think he's got really bright ideas. I like the way he wants to play. Although sometimes I think he's a bit too naive or maybe a bit too stubborn in that it's kind of his way or the highway. But I do think he has some very positive footballing ideas that, if executed correctly, I think makes his team one of the most fascinating teams to watch. The problem is there's been too many days where it's gone wrong than compared to days right. But you think about when Ange kind of came to the club in a position when Spurs had just lost Harry Kane, they had just finished in 9th place, and expectations were on the ground. Ange came in, breathed new life into the club, had Spurs in a title race, if you want to call it that, for the first few months of the season, and ultimately it kind of fell apart. But after year one of Ange, they had qualified for the Europa League, they had finished higher than anyone expected before the season, and I think the mood was positive, and I think it was deserved. I think Ange had done a good job the first season, even despite the way the end of the season kind of ended. Going into this year, though, I'm sorry. Yes, winning a trophy is always seen as a huge success at Spurs because of the last damn near 20 years that the club has kind of faced. But I am of the belief, and I've said this a few times this year now, that Tottenham Hotspur have established themselves as a big enough footballing club. Not to the level of Man United, not to the level of Real Madrid, I get that, right? But they've still established themselves as a big enough club that, I'm sorry, the Europa League, the Carabao Cup, even the FA Cup should not be seen as enough to counteract a season where you lose 22 games in the league. Right? I get what the trophy means to them. You saw the parade, you saw the fans, you saw the players, you saw, like, it means a lot. I get that. But it can never mean enough to counteract, to balance out 22 losses in the league. And I mean, if you stretch it back to January of last year, like the second half of last season into the entirety of this season, Spurs have been one of the worst teams in the league for that entire run. And I understand there's context to it. They've had huge injury problems, specifically at center back, where Archie Gray has played huge minutes at center back. Dragusin has played huge minutes at center back. There's been injuries throughout the team. I get that. But I'm sorry, 22 losses this season is not acceptable. And people get mad at me, or like people kind of like sneer at me when I say Spurs I think are too big of a club. Again, I'm not trying to say they're at Real Madrid's level, but think about where Spurs have kind of taken themselves post 2010, right? Since Harry Redknapp had that season where they got into the Champions League. They have been in the Champions League numerous seasons, like to the point where you could say, yeah, they're not an established Champions League club because that's a team that makes it every year, but they make it more often than not. Like, they at least made it a few times, right? They went to a Champions League final. They've been a consistent top 6 team. There was a period where they were making the top 4 every single year. They were in 2 title races, and they've moved into a state-of-the-art stadium, one of the best in the world. In that period, they've competed for some of the best signings in the world. They've hired some of the best managers in the world. Spurs are no longer a club that you can compare to like Palace or Fulham, or I would even, like, again, these clubs might find this offensive, but I think they've even become a bigger club than the likes of Newcastle, than the likes of Everton. Like, those are huge historic clubs, but in the modern era, Spurs have established themselves as bigger, relative, like, currently, than those clubs. So the expectation should also rise with that, is kind of my point. Like, you can't keep thinking about Spurs, what they were in the 2000s, or you can't keep thinking about them that way because of what they've built over the last 10 years. And because of what they've built, expectation has to change. So yes, trophies are hugely important, especially for a club that hasn't won them. But 22 losses, the manner in some of the losses that they've faced, the amount of goals that they've conceded in this period. I'm sorry, even as somebody who has huge respect and thinks that Ange will land on his feet very, very well after this, that's unacceptable. It is unacceptable. And I think Spurs have made the right decision today. The counter argument will be you have to give Ange more of a time with his players. Maybe this season they won't face as many injuries, give him more money in the window. And who's to say that Ange, if given all those circumstances, if given all of that help, maybe he does have a better season next year. Who knows? I couldn't tell you, right? And we'll never know. But I think there's also enough of a sample size after 2 seasons to kind of see Ange is just too stubborn, man. Ange is just too stubborn, because even when he had his best players available to him in the league, they were always a team that looked vulnerable. They were always a team that looked like they could be killed on counterattacks, that could be killed with crosses into the box, set pieces. They always looked vulnerable, whether it was a Romero and Van de Ven or Dragusin and Archie Gray. And I know with those two, the latter, it was obviously much, much worse. But even with his best players, why are we like? Let's not pretend it was all rosy under Ange the entire time. I think the first few months of his tenure were amazing. But since then, and I really kind of pinpoint that loss against Chelsea where they went down to 9 men, and I think they ended up losing like what? 4-1. I honestly think after that moment, it all kind of went to shit for Ange. I don't think it ever kind of went back up in the way he would have wanted it to. And again, I think Ange cannot complain too much about it. It's similar to how I feel about Emerim, right? If Man United decided to keep Emerim, I'm not really too fussed about it. Like, I can hear the argument that he deserves more time and money. But also, if they had fired him, I wouldn't really be completely against it either, because the sample size that he's been here, he hasn't really like lit the world up. It's similar to Ange. Like, yes, Ange can probably come up with arguments why he should have been given another year or at least a few more months. But here's another thing, and it's similar to the Ten Hag situation. Let's say you give Ange, like, what if you're a Spurs fan and you wanted Ange to stay? What's the longest amount of time you would give him next season until you decide, okay, results still aren't good enough, he needs to go? Like, what's the longest leash you would afford him? If the answer is anything equal to or less than 10 games, I'm sorry. It's not a risk worth taking. Like, if you're only willing to give him 10 games into next season to turn it around, then you don't have enough confidence in him to be your long-term manager. And you can't keep going on like 10-game periods or like, oh, what does he do on this cup run? You have to think longer term than that. You have to think more sustainably than that. Like, if you think you can find a manager that longer than 10 games can bring sustainable success to Spurs, I'm sorry, you have to make that decision. And it's a decision, again, I wish Man United had made when Erik ten Hag had won the FA Cup for United. Because although that was a great accomplishment for the team, beating City in the final, you can't just ignore 38 games of a season and all the other cup runs you failed in the rest of the year, right? Like, that's just, in my opinion, you can afford to do that if you're like Wigan when you win the FA Cup a few years back. Or if Leicester this year won the FA Cup but got relegated, then okay, maybe you can think a bit differently because the expectations are a lot less for those kinds of clubs. But Spurs, I'm sorry, like, I will never get behind the idea that clubs of that stature should just be able to throw away league campaigns, and as long as you win a cup, like the Champions League, okay, the Premier League, okay, even the FA Cup for a club like Spurs, maybe, but the Europa League, and I understand the Europa League has got them into the Champions League. I get that. But guys, we also can't just remove the entire context of the rest of the season because of one cup run. And honestly, the cup run, if you actually look at it like in depth, take away the league season, Spurs' best moments this season in the cup run actually came when Ange was willing to sacrifice his principles and play a bit more defensive and play a bit more safe and prioritize winning more than just his philosophy. And I often have people saying, well, you love Hansi Flick. You always praise Hansi Flick, but you don't show the same energy to Ange. At the end of the day, guys, football's about winning. It is about winning. And if you can play beautiful football and you're winning, by all means, I think that should be the priority, right? Winning and playing beautiful football should be every team's priority. But playing beautiful football shouldn't be a bigger priority than winning, right? Like, it's great if you have both, but you have to win. Everyone would rather be an ugly winner than a beautiful loser. When it comes to football, that's unfortunately the truth of the situation. No one remembers the losers. And if Hansi Flick was an absolute failure of a manager, I wouldn't be praising his football as much. But it's the fact that his football is as successful as it is that you can then say, wow, and it's so fun to watch. But I'm sorry, if you're losing 22 games a season, ain't nobody talking about how beautiful Ange's football is. Because all anyone's ever thinking about is how many goals they concede. how many games they lose, the morale of the squad. Look, I like Ange, and I hope he has a lot of success going forward. And I actually think he will land on his feet okay, because again, I think he's a good manager. Maybe the next job he takes, I think he needs to adapt a little bit more, because I think with Spurs, he was just way too stubborn. But truthfully, I think this is the right decision. Now, according to several reports, it does appear like Thomas Frank is going to be Spurs' #1 target. He's the goal for them. They want him to be Ange's successor. I think it's a great hire potentially. I think Thomas Frank has really kind of built himself a resume, a body of work in the Premier League under Brentford to be considered for these kinds of jobs. I remember when Ten Hag got fired and Thomas Frank was considered as the next Man United manager. I wasn't upset about that whatsoever, because yes, he coaches at Brentford. It's a different level to Man United, but I think Thomas Frank has shown he has the personality and he has the tactical nous and he has the level-headedness and the eye for talent to make the step up to a big club. And I think Spurs, to be honest with you, would be the perfect step up for him. I think he would succeed at Spurs. That's not a guarantee, because managers with bigger resumes than him have failed. But I think Thomas Frank is ready to take that next step. I mean, the other managers kind of being rumored around. Marco Silva is a name being whispered around. I think Marco Silva is similar to Thomas Frank, maybe not as long, but what he's done at Fulham over the last few years, rebuilding that squad, losing his best players, keeping them competitive. I think you have to admire it, and I think he as well too might just be ready for that next step up. But for Spurs, it's the end of the line for Ange, and although I do see some people a little upset that he didn't get given more time, I think you got to just look at it like this, right? He gave you guys a night that you will never forget. That night in Bilbao, I mean, I was there. I was there on the other side. I suffered at the hands of Ange, but you guys were given the night of your lives by this guy. And I think that's the way you guys should just remember him, because trust me, this feeling that you guys have for Ange over the last 2 weeks, right? It didn't exist with most of you guys before the last 2 weeks, because we've all seen how Spurs fans have treated Ange this year. And I promise you, if you guys had gone into next season and within 5-6 games were around 15th, 16th in the league, the good mood, the emotional state that you guys are in right now would have quickly faded. And again, the pitchforks would have been out for the guy. So it's better, honestly, for him to leave now while the emotions are still good. And it's why I continue saying about United and I continue saying about Spurs, right? And in general with football clubs. Fans are allowed to dream. Fans are allowed to be emotional. Fans are allowed to be sentimental. That's in our nature. I don't want my owners, my board members, my directors of football, my guys in head footballing positions to be emotional and sentimental. I do not want that. I want them to be logical, concise, clear thinking, and operating on facts, or as close to facts as you can get. And I think most of the facts of Ange Postecoglou state that this is the correct decision. Let's see how it goes. Spurs fans, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Who would you guys most like to see take over the job next? Is it Thomas Frank? Is it Marco Silva? Or is there another name on the agenda that you'd like to see come to your club? That being said, it's been your boy Lyes. Like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you guys very, very soon. Peace.